Officer Derek Halston didn't fear the courtroom. He feared who was sitting on the bench, a black woman named Judge Camilla Warren. From the moment he stepped inside, his pride turned to fury. To him, she didn't belong up there, and he made no effort to hide it. As evidence mounted and the pressure closed in, Halston didn't just break the rules, he crossed a line no one expected. What followed sent shockwaves through the entire city and cracked open a system that had quietly protected him for years. But Judge Warren, she didn't flinch. Before we dive in, tell us where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the truth behind the robe. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood. Mornings in Charleston always started quiet, but today the silence felt different. Heavy, deliberate, like the city was holding its breath. Judge Camilla Warren stood alone in her chambers, the soft rustle of her black robe, the only sound as she reached for a thin-worn case file. The tab read, Thomas Ely, 2014. She hadn't touched it in over a decade, but the memory had never left her. Back then, the boy was 17. Black, quiet, a high school senior walking home after tutoring younger kids at the community center. The police report said he resisted, but the photos told a different story. Broken ribs, swollen eye. The kind of injuries that don't come from resisting, they come from punishment. The file had been closed in 3 weeks. Lack of evidence, inconclusive findings, 100 ways to say no one wanted to look deeper. But now she had to, because the man who wrote that report, Officer Derek Halston, was finally on trial. Not for what he did that night in 2014, but for everything that had come after. Her radio played low in the background as she sat down. A voice crackled through. In national news, former Charleston police officer Derek Halston faces trial today for multiple charges, including falsifying evidence and abuse of power. Allegations span over a decade. Camilla turned the volume down. She didn't need the recap. She had lived the echo of those cases for years. She opened the file. The first page was Eli's statement, written in tight, careful print. He had tried to sound calm, objective even. But in the margins, she saw something else, smudges where fingers had pressed too hard, maybe shaking. A small blood stain near the bottom corner. Probably overlooked. Probably ignored. Outside, the courthouse steps were already filling. Reporters, activists, off-duty officers in plain clothes. They weren't here just for Halston. They were here for what it meant, a white officer finally facing consequences in a courtroom led by a black woman. Inside, the tension was alive. Bailiffs double-checked every corner. The clerk kept glancing toward the hallway. Even the wooden pews seemed to brace themselves. Camilla stood slowly, smoothed the front of her robe, and walked toward the mirror. She didn't check her hair. She looked into her own eyes and whispered almost to herself, "Today is not about noise. It's about not looking away." She stepped into the corridor. The sound of her heels against the floor was firm, measured. No hesitation. She moved like someone who'd worn this robe long enough to know its weight and its burden. As she entered the courtroom, a hush fell. Cameras clicked, but no one dared speak. The seal of the state hung above her seat, casting a long shadow on the bench. Halston hadn't arrived yet, but his presence already loomed like a storm that had finally circled back to the place it first struck. Camilla sat. She didn't lean back. Her hands rested gently on the desk, but her spine was straight, her gaze calm. The kind of calm that came not from peace, but from surviving the absence of it. There was a story buried beneath this courtroom, one written in closed cases, lost names, and unchecked power. She had spent years walking over it. Now it was time to dig. And as the courtroom doors opened, and the man who once wore a badge stepped inside with a smirk, she didn't flinch, because she remembered something he didn't. History doesn't forget, it waits. And today it had a voice. The doors opened. Derek Halston stepped into the courtroom like a man walking into a room he used to own. His posture was rigid, chin up, shoulders squared, dressed in a sharp navy suit that still couldn't hide the years of control stitched into his very being. But it wasn't the arrogance that unsettled the room, it was the look in his eyes. Cold, calculated. And when they landed on Judge Camilla Warren, they didn't carry contempt. They carried war. He didn't sneer, he didn't smirk. His stare was sharper than either. It was personal, and Camilla met it without blinking. She gave him nothing. Not a twitch, not a flicker. Just the gaze of someone who had spent years listening to lies disguised as law and still showed up for the truth. The bailiff called the court to order. The jury filed in 12 faces, trying not to react. The air was brittle. Everyone knew this wasn't just another trial. This was Charleston reckoning with its own reflection. The first witness, took the stand. Dr. Lena Brody, forensic analyst, straightforward, unshaken. She adjusted her glasses and began her testimony, flipping through a digital timeline of the 2014 assault report. According to Officer Halston's report, the incident occurred at 9:17 p.m. However, timestamped surveillance shows the initial contact happened at 8:42 p.m., a 35-minute discrepancy. The officer's body cam footage also went missing during this window. The courtroom murmured. Additionally, she continued, the hospital records indicate the victim, Eli Thomas, had injuries inconsistent with the physical resistance described in the officer's statement. In short, the force applied was excessive and misrepresented. Halston's lawyer objected. Overruled. Camilla's voice was even as she delivered the ruling, but her eyes didn't leave Halston. He didn't look back. He was staring ahead now, straight through the wall, jaw clenched. In the gallery, several men in uniform sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes, narrow arms crossed. Old colleagues, some were retired, others still on the force. A low voice broke the silence between them. She's just here to make headlines, not justice. The man beside him didn't respond. He just shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the bench. Camilla caught it. Not the words, but the energy. She'd felt it before. That quiet resentment that followed women like her into every room. The kind that didn't shout, just simmered. She let it simmer, let it fill the space like smoke, and still she didn't break her composure. She had learned a long time ago, justice doesn't move faster just because you raise your voice. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, quiet, sharp, and undeniable. Back on the stand, Dr. Brody pulled up another image, a freeze frame from a convenience store camera. This footage was never submitted into evidence, she said. We found it during an independent audit 2 years later. It shows the victim with hands raised before any physical contact. Another ripple. Halston's jaw tightened. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something sharp and fast. The lawyer raised a hand, requesting a recess. Denied. Camilla's voice again, steady, unshaken. The court will proceed. She could feel the room shifting, some people leaning in for the first time, others stiffening in defense. It wasn't just about Halston anymore. It was about how many reports like his had been waved through without question. How many glitches had been quietly filed away? How many young men, like Eli, had walked into the night thinking someone would protect them and instead met a badge that didn't care to listen? Camilla didn't speak again that day, not more than she had to, but her silence said enough. She'd seen these cracks before. She just never expected to be the one sitting at the fault line watching them split open one detail at a time. And this time the floor wouldn't close over it. The second day of trial began with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside the courtroom, the walls felt closer, as if even the architecture knew this wasn't going to be a day for composure. Derek Halston sat stiff in his chair, eyes darker than the day before, jaw working constantly, like he was chewing on something bitter. His lawyer whispered to him in a low, urgent tone, trying to keep things calm. But the tension had already begun to seep through the cracks. The next witness had barely made it through her statement when Halston started muttering. At first it was under his breath. Lies, all of them. Media dogs, dirty politics. The prosecutor paused mid-question, glancing sideways. The witness stiffened. Camilla tilted her head slightly, not in alarm, but in observation. She didn't call him out, not yet. But Halston kept going louder now. None of this is about truth. It's about revenge. It's all theater for the cameras. His attorney touched his arm. Derek stopped, but he didn't. He stood. Not fully, just enough to make his presence swell in the space. His eyes, sharp as knives, locked onto Camilla. You think you're better than me, he spat, sitting up there in that robe like you earned it? A hush fell so fast it hurt. It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it. With that sneer, that years-old bile of a man raised to believe robes belonged only to certain people and that she was never supposed to be one of them. Camilla didn't flinch. She didn't look at the bailiff. She didn't even blink. She just met his stare, calm, direct, unapologetic. And then she said in a voice steady enough to freeze a flame, "This bench wasn't given. It was fought for. And I'm here because truth doesn't ask permission." No one moved. Even the stenographer forgot to type. It was one of those moments that didn't need to be loud to echo. In the back of the room, a retired officer shifted, his arms unfolded. The woman beside him, a former city prosecutor, leaned forward slightly. Not in disbelief, just in recognition. This wasn't the kind of judge who wore her robe for show. She wore it like armor earned in pieces sewn together with resistance, persistence, and the scars of history. Halston looked around the room. The confidence on his face cracked for half a breath. And for the first time, he seemed aware that maybe this courtroom wasn't orbiting around him. His lawyer pulled him gently by the sleeve. "Sit down," he whispered, urgent now. "You're not helping yourself." Halston dropped back into his chair with a sharp exhale, eyes still burning but silent for now. The trial resumed. Testimonies continued, more forensics, more conflicting details from Halston's old reports. But something had shifted. Because from that moment on, people started listening differently. They weren't just hearing about one bad cop anymore. They were witnessing the rot that seeps in when a man believes he is untouchable and then meets someone who refuses to bow. Camilla let the rest of the day unfold without commentary, but her presence loomed larger than ever. There's a certain kind of power that doesn't need to be loud, the kind that doesn't scream to be respected. It simply stands its ground and dares the room to catch up. And that day, for the first time in a long time, the room started to catch up. It was late afternoon when the next witness stepped forward. Officer Brantley Hughes, quiet, nervous, a patrolman who served under Halston in 2019. He wasn't supposed to testify not until new evidence surfaced just 2 nights before. The DA had called him last minute. Camilla studied him as he took the stand. His eyes flicked to Halston, then down, then forward. In July of 2019, Hughes began, voice barely above a whisper. "I responded to a call in Northport Heights. I wasn't the first on scene, Officer Halston was. By the time I arrived, the suspect was already in cuffs and bleeding." He swallowed hard. "The kid was maybe 16. Said he was roughed up in the alley. I filed the report, but the next morning, Halston told me to rewrite it. Said it needed to sound cleaner. Said the department didn't need another mess in the press." A ripple ran through the courtroom. Halston didn't blink, but his fingers twitched on the table. "And you rewrote the report?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Hughes admitted. "I changed the timeline. Removed the part about the injury being pre-arrest. I'm sorry, I was scared." And then Halston stood, abrupt, sudden. A chair scraped back across the tile like a blade. The bailiff took a step forward, unsure. The judge's gavel hadn't moved. But it wasn't Halston's stance that turned the room to ice. It was the sound, metal, faint, quick. A soft click like a tool brushing against a belt buckle. A black object slipped from under Halston's coat sleeve. Small, cold, a gun. Gasps, a cry. The prosecutor froze mid-step. The stenographer dropped her pen. But Judge Camilla Warren did not move. She didn't duck. She didn't call for order. She simply watched him. Halston's hand trembled just slightly, not with fear, but with fury held too long. "I bled for this city," he snarled, voice shaking now. "Gave it everything. And now you all treat me like trash." He pointed the weapon at her, one hand firm, the other clenched tight at his side. The courtroom was dead silent. Even breath felt too loud. But Camilla didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and spoke, voice low and calm as a midnight bell. "You didn't fall because someone pushed you. You fell because you stopped standing for anything real." For a second time splintered. No one moved. Then, click, not a shot. Just the sound of a trigger falling on an empty chamber. The silence that followed was deafening. And then chaos. SWAT moved in fast. Doors burst open. Shouts filled the space. Officers surged forward, pinning Halston to the ground before he could speak again. The gun clattered across the floor, harmless. Camilla still hadn't moved. Her hands rested calmly on the bench. In the gallery, some people were crying, others trembling, but all eyes were still on her. And somewhere just beyond the door, Carla Moreno stood, hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. She had been the one to switch the magazine, a quiet act of courage. 12 years ago, Halston forced her to alter a report, threatened her career, her family. But this morning, she had walked into the evidence room alone. No witnesses, just resolve. She hadn't told anyone, not even Camilla. Now standing there, she finally exhaled. Inside the courtroom, as order slowly returned, Camilla leaned slightly forward, gaze still fixed on Halston being led away in cuffs. Not triumphant, not shaken, just resolute. Because she knew now, this trial wasn't just about him pulling a trigger. It was about who had stopped him from firing it, and why. Click. The sound echoed like a scream swallowed too fast. Not a shot, just the empty click of a trigger finding nothing. For a second, no one in the courtroom breathed. It was as if time itself had recoiled in shock, waiting to see if reality would catch up. Then the door slammed open. SWAT stormed in black gear, gleaming weapons-drawn voices, booming orders. Within seconds, Halston was on the ground, his face twisted between rage and confusion, arms pinned behind his back. There were bullets, he shouted. I loaded it myself. But the weapon told a different story. The chamber was clean, the magazine completely empty. From the bench, Camilla Warren remained still, not triumphant, not shaken, just quiet, watching. There was a certain kind of silence that didn't come from fear. It came from understanding something deeper than violence. And Camilla understood. Because this wasn't luck. It was choice, 2 hours earlier. Carla Moreno stood in the evidence room, heart pounding in her throat. Her uniform looked like it had been ironed for a funeral crisp, too perfect, hiding a storm beneath. Her badge felt heavier than usual. Or maybe she finally understood what it was supposed to mean. In her hand, she held Halston's service pistol. Assigned to courtroom security that day, she had access. And she had the moment. 5 minutes alone before it was checked and sealed for officer familiarity protocol. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the release and slid out the magazine. 7 rounds, all intact. She looked at them like they were something unholy. 12 years ago, she had sat across from Halston in an interrogation room after a brutal street incident. He didn't threaten her, not directly, but he made it clear she could rewrite the report or she could find herself on traffic duty in the worst neighborhood with no backup and no future. She rewrote the report and lived with it every day since. Carla stared at the bullets in her palm. She took a breath, shallow, sharp. Then slowly, one by one, she slipped them into her pocket. The magazine went back in empty. She locked the gun, logged the check, walked out like nothing happened. Back in the present, she stood outside the courtroom just beyond the glass. From her angle, she couldn't see the weapon, but she saw Camilla, standing tall, unmoving, and then the click. Carla's knees almost gave out. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sound she couldn't name. Tears slid down her cheeks, not because of fear, but because for the first time since that terrible night 12 years ago, she hadn't looked away. She had done something right. Inside, Halston thrashed in the arms of the SWAT officer, still shouting. That gun was loaded, I loaded it myself. But no one believed him, because they all knew something bigger had just happened here. Camilla finally rose from the bench. No expression, no gavel, no words. She stepped down, walking slowly past Halston, who had once worn his badge like a shield, and now sat on the floor like a broken mirror of everything that shield had protected. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. There was no satisfaction in hers, only certainty. Because justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes on quiet feet through someone you forgot, someone you once silenced. And this time it came through a woman who had once been afraid but wasn't anymore. Carla didn't enter the courtroom. She didn't need to. She just stood in the hallway, hands still covering her mouth, tears falling freely now. And when a fellow officer passed her wide-eyed and breathless, she didn't explain. She didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for her in the space between a trigger and a bullet that never came. The courthouse was quiet now. Not the kind of silence that comes with calm, but the kind that arrives after something unthinkable when everyone is still trying to understand what didn't happen and why it almost did. But in one corner office on the second floor, the silence was being broken page by page. Judge Camilla Warren sat behind a wide oak table, sleeves rolled up, glasses pushed low on her nose. To her left, Carla Moreno sat in uniform posture, rigid, but eyes locked on the file in front of her, like it might breathe if she looked away. And across from them, Tiffany Sharp, young, sharp, and visibly tired, tapped the spacebar on her laptop, with the kind of focus only grief or fury can sharpen. Stacks of documents surrounded them, some photocopied, some so old their corners curled like leaves in the sun. None of them had ever been intended to see daylight. No timestamps on this footage, Tiffany murmured, scrolling through grainy surveillance stills. And look here, same pattern camera goes dead for 15 minutes right at the time of the incident. Victim male, black, 19, no arrest report, no medical record, just disappeared. Carla didn't speak. She just passed over another folder. Camilla opened it slowly, another name, another scar. Same officer Halston, she said, filed under use of force, cleared. Cleared by internal review, signed by Captain Aaron Keller. That name kept repeating not just once, not twice, but dozens of times, always at the bottom of reports where nothing added up. Always the last word in cases that never found justice. Keller ran internal affairs for 10 years, Carla said, her voice tight. Everything came through him. If something needed to disappear, it went through his desk. Tiffany paused. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, fingers curling slightly as the weight of what they were uncovering began to settle on her spine. I tried to write about him once, she said quietly. 2 years ago, a whistleblower gave me footage from a case where Keller ordered a misconduct report shredded. A week later, someone broke into my apartment, laptop gone. No fingerprints, just silence. Camilla looked up. Her voice was quiet but firm. And why are you here now? Tiffany didn't hesitate. Because I'm done being afraid. And because I watched you stare down a gun yesterday and not flinch. If you didn't back down, I won't either. No one said anything for a long moment. The only sound was paper rustling, keys tapping, and the soft hum of a city trying to pretend it hadn't looked the other way. Camilla leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the ceiling, as if it might answer something she didn't yet know how to ask. These aren't just broken files, she said. They're broken lives. And then her eyes drifted back to the stack. So many faces, some without names, just initials, injuries, vague descriptions. Carla flipped open a file from 2016. Another missing video, another black teenager. Resisted arrest, no charges filed, but no complaint taken either. Just paperwork that looked official but said nothing. Her voice cracked. I was on patrol that night. I remember this call. Kid was cuffed before I got there. Face was swollen. I asked Halston what happened. He said just another mouthy punk who needed to learn. And then the report vanished. She closed the folder. Tiffany looked up. We need to name them. All of them. I don't care if it takes a month or a year. I want faces, stories, everything they thought they buried. We publish it. In full. Camilla gave a slight nod, not as a judge, but as a witness. A witness to years of silence now being rewritten in real time by the women who refused to forget. Outside, Charleston looked the same. But inside that room, something had shifted. Because now they weren't just reopening cases. They were reclaiming truth, the kind that bleeds on paper and lives in people's bones. And once the truth begins to breathe again, it doesn't go quietly. The knock came late, well past office hours, when the courthouse was empty enough for echoes. Judge Camilla Warren was still at her desk, a mug of lukewarm coffee by her side, her fingers absently turning a page of case notes she could recite in her sleep. She wasn't expecting anyone. She called out, "Come in." The door opened slowly as if pushed by hesitation itself. And then he stepped in. Eli Thomas, older now, 30, maybe 31, taller than she remembered, shoulders hunched not from weakness, but from too many years of carrying something no one had helped him name. His face had aged lines at the corners of his eyes, a subtle stiffness in his gait, but the scar beneath his right cheekbone was unmistakable, faint but permanent, a reminder of a night the justice system had tried to forget. He took off his cap and held it in both hands like a man stepping into a church. Camilla stood slowly. For a second, neither of them spoke. The past sat between them, heavy and uninvited, like a third person in the room. "I didn't think I'd ever come back here," Eli said at last. His voice was low, rough around the edges. "But I saw the news. I saw you." She nodded once gently. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to be found." "I didn't," he admitted. "I had a life, a joke, nothing fancy, but it was mine. And for a long time I thought maybe if I stayed quiet it wouldn't matter anymore." He paused. "But it does, it always has." From his pocket he pulled out an envelope, creased worn but carefully sealed. He handed it to her. Inside were 3 photographs, grainy images from a street camera no one had mentioned in the trial. The night of the assault, Eli with his hands up, a baton mid-swing, Halston's face half-shadowed, unmistakable. Alongside it was a folded paper, a sworn statement handwritten. "I've been holding on to this since 2015, Eli said. "I was going to give it to a lawyer once. But I got a call that night, no name, just a voice. Said if I talked, I'd regret it." Camilla clenched the paper in her hand but said nothing. Eli looked around the room, at the bookshelves, at the state seal above her head, at the robe draped over the back of her chair. "Back then I thought no one would believe me," he said. "But when I saw you on that bench not moving when he pulled the gun, I realized something. You believed me, even when I didn't speak." She walked around the desk slowly, carefully, as if not to break the fragile air between them. And then she reached out, not with the authority of a judge, but with the tenderness of a woman who knew what it meant to carry pain in silence. Her hand closed around his, firm, warm, human. "You shouldn't have carried this alone for so long," she said, her voice soft and cracking. His grip tightened slightly. "You carried it too," he replied. "And now we carry it together." A silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of years never spoken aloud. Of nights Eli had flinched at shadows. Of mornings Camilla had looked in the mirror and wondered if the system she served could ever be saved. Of all the names in the files and all the voices in the dark. And now one of them had returned. Not as a victim, but as a witness. As proof that truth never truly disappears, it just waits for someone brave enough to call it by name. Camilla looked at him. "Will you testify?" He took a breath, let it out slowly. "Yes, this time I will." She gave a small nod, eyes shimmering but steady. "Then let's finish what they tried to bury." It started with one headline. Not one bad cop, a system that built them. Byline Tiffany Sharp, investigative reporter. The article hit the front page at 6:42 a.m. 2 a.m. By noon, it had been shared over 2 million times. In sharp, unflinching prose, Tiffany laid out the anatomy of a broken system, falsified reports, missing evidence, internal reviews signed off by the same hands over and over again. And at the center of it all, Captain Aaron Keller, who had quietly ruled internal affairs like a shadow chancellor for a decade. The article didn't just mention names, it named patterns. We weren't failed by one man with a badge. We were failed by silence, by those who looked away, by the paperwork that erased the people it was supposed to protect. It was a spark thrown onto dry kindling. By late afternoon, the phone in Camilla's chambers rang nonstop. People calling, whispering, asking if it was finally safe to speak. And then they did. 3 retired officers stepped forward, 2 white, 1 Latino. Each told their story with the careful cadence of men who had carried guilt for far too long. "I saw the bruises. I filed the complaint. It disappeared. They told me Halston was aggressive, not abusive. But the kid had a concussion. I warned the review board. They said, 'Not your battle. Let it go.' So I did. I'm not proud of that." Then came a former assistant DA, a woman who had quietly left her post 6 years ago. She brought emails, memos, notes she'd kept not for revenge, but for the day someone might finally care. "I was told certain cases didn't have political upside. I was told justice wasn't the goal, stability was. Well, stability let people like Halston thrive." And then, most unexpectedly, a clerk from Internal Affairs. 32, black, quiet, almost invisible for years. He brought a folder labeled Archive, Not to be Filed. Inside were the original complaints against Halston. Unedited, stamped then shelved, each with Keller's initials in the margin. No more denials, no more excuses. Camilla read every page, one by one, in silence. And when she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy but burning. A week later, she stood before the Charleston Oversight Committee, not in a robe, but in a gray suit with sleeves rolled high and voice steady as steel. "Justice isn't served when power is preserved," she said. "It's served when truth is no longer silenced." There was no applause, only stillness. That night, Keller announced his early retirement. No press conference, no farewell. 5 officers were placed on immediate suspension pending criminal investigation. And then something rare happened. No shouting, no riots, no sirens. Just a quiet ripple. A march began downtown. No flags, no chants, just people, hundreds at first, then thousands walking side by side holding signs with nothing but names. The names of those from the files. The names erased. The names once buried in footnotes and falsehoods. Carla Moreno walked near the back, not in uniform, but with her badge in her pocket, not hidden, just carried differently now. Eli Thomas walked silently beside his mother, his scar still visible, his voice now loud in print and on record. Tiffany Sharp trailed just behind with her notepad and camera, but for once she wasn't recording, just witnessing. And at the front, Judge Camilla Warren walked alone. No podium, no microphone. But every step she took felt like a sentence spoken into history. Because systems don't break in one day, and they don't heal in one either. But on that day, they cracked loudly enough for the whole city to hear. The courtroom was smaller this time. No press, no cameras. Just rows of people who had stayed through testimony, through backlash, through silence and noise alike. Derek Halston was led in wrist-cuffed, suit wrinkled. The arrogance he once wore like armor was gone. What remained was a man plain pale and hollow-eyed. The trial had stripped him of the uniform, the story, the swagger. This time, there was no illusion left to hide behind. Camilla didn't sit on the bench today. She took her place in the gallery front row center. No robe, just a navy coat, simple earrings, and the same steel in her posture she'd worn for 20 years. To her left sat Carla Moreno, hands clasped tight. To her right, Eli Thomas, jaw set. And beside him, Tiffany Sharp, pen silent for once. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The courtroom settled. The jury returned, 12 faces unreadable, carrying the weight of 100 truths finally told. The 4-person stood. In the matter of Derek Halston, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. No one clapped. No one cheered. Just silence. A woman near the back rose to her feet. Slowly, carefully, her gray shawl draped across trembling shoulders. In her hands, a photograph, a teenage boy with bright eyes and a crooked smile. The same boy whose name appeared in an incident report from 2015, bruised, dismissed, forgotten. She didn't speak. She just let the tears fall, one hand holding the picture, the other over her heart. The sound of it, quiet weeping in a courtroom built for denial, said more than a gavel ever could. Halston looked up slowly like a man waking from a dream he couldn't return to. He stared at the ceiling as if searching for an exit, a trap door, a last lie to hold on to. But there was nothing there, just plaster paint and the weight of real consequences. His eyes darted toward Camilla. For a split second, he seemed to want something, a reaction, a word, maybe even mercy. But she gave him none of those. Only a whisper barely audible, not for him, but for herself. Then let it end with you. No more shadows. No more reports with missing pages. No more young men with broken ribs and no witnesses. No more systems that devoured the truth one file at a time. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like something heavier, like walking out of a cave after years of choking in silence. As Halston was led away, the door clicked shut behind him with a finality that needed no punctuation. Camilla stood slowly and walked out with the others. Not ahead, not behind. Together. It took 3 weeks to finish. The wall stood in the eastern hallway of the Charleston courthouse. Simple brick, once blank, now transformed. Etched into its surface in clean, even lines were names. Dozens of them. Some familiar, some never spoken aloud until now. They were not just victims. They were not just statistics. They were teachers and brothers, nurses and grandmothers, students and sons. And among them, the names of those who had chosen to stand, those who spoke up when silence was safer. Carla Moreno, Eli Thomas, Tiffany Sharp. Even those retired officers who finally came forward. Each name carved the same size, the same weight. Because justice doesn't rank courage, it simply honors it. At the center of the wall, framed in brass, were 5 words. This time we listened back. The dedication ceremony was small. No podium, no long speeches, just people gathered, touching names, whispering stories, leaving behind flowers and folded papers. Toward the end, a group of high school students arrived, part of a civic leadership program from a nearby public school. They had read the articles, watched the hearings. One of them, a girl with paint-stained fingers in a journal tucked into her backpack, had submitted a proposal, a mural. It stretched the length of the West Quarter, color against stone. At its center was the portrait of a woman in black robes, her eyes forward, unblinking. Judge Camilla Warren. The caption was handwritten beneath it in gold paint. She didn't flinch. Camilla stood before it, quietly unsure what to say. She'd never thought of herself as a symbol. Never cared to be one. She was raised to work, not to be seen. But now, standing in front of the painting, she felt the weight of it, not as ego, but as legacy. And legacy, she realized, wasn't something you kept. It was something you gave away. The next morning, she visited Miss Lila Henderson's 9th grade civics class, where students had just begun a semester-long project titled Justice and Community. She didn't bring a speech. Instead, she brought a small wooden box. Inside it lay her gavel, the one she'd carried through 27 years of trials, decisions, and long nights wondering if it all mattered. She placed it on the teacher's desk and stepped back. This, she said gently, doesn't belong on a bench anymore. It belongs in hands that still believe in asking why. In voices that haven't been told they're too young to make change. A boy in the front row raised his hand. Does that mean you're retiring? Camilla smiled. No, just shifting where I sit. The class laughed softly, but there was something in their eyes, something real. Later that week, the school placed the gavel in a glass case next to a new student-written pledge. We don't inherit justice, we shape it. Outside the courthouse, the city was still the same in many ways. There were still headlines, still court dates, still politics, but something had shifted underneath it all. People lingered longer near the wall now. Children traced the names with small fingers. Some officers walked by without looking, others stopped. 1 or 2 even cried. And every Friday afternoon, without announcement or planning, someone left a small bouquet of sunflowers beneath Camilla's mural. No one claimed them. No one needed to, because symbols once planted don't need to shout. They just need to stand. And long after the trials were done and the noise had faded and the reporters had moved on, a line remained painted softly at the bottom edge of the mural, just above the baseboard. The final words of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Justice doesn't wear a robe. It walks beside those who choose to stay when others turn away. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful stories that matter. This wasn't just about justice in court. It was about standing up, speaking out, and refusing to stay silent. Your support helps us keep telling the stories others forget. And every click, every share, every kind word gives our team the strength to keep going. Thank you for watching and for choosing to listen. We'll see you in the next story.